Hello, and welcome to the fourth episode of the Bitcoin Hour. I am Dave Bradley, the strongest and best looking Bitcoin entrepreneur in Canada. So I continue to get a lot of good feedback about this new show, and a number of people have asked me, who are you going to have on there? Who are the guests going to be? Are you going to have any guests? And the answer to that is that there will definitely be no guests unless I change my mind. So we'll see. With that, I'm going to go into today's topic. We're going to be going back to this Bitcoin fixes everything topic. That's something I was discussing over the weekend. And I want to get to one of the topics that somebody brought up over the weekend that I thought was a really good one. Somebody asked me, Dave, how does Bitcoin fix the airline industry? And I think the airline industry is an industry that we could all agree very badly needs some fixing. It's a very unpleasant experience to take a commercial flight these days, and is much more costly than it needs to be, and is full of unnecessary indignities, all in the name of this sort of faulty sense of security, this security theater that the government has set up around air travel. So I'm going to start by just sort of looking at what are my incentives, or the incentives that I think an average person would have when taking a flight somewhere. And the first one, the big one, is that you want the plane to get you there, right? You want to leave wherever you are, and you want to get somewhere else. And presumably, you want to do that a lot faster than if you were to drive or take another method of transportation, right? And so that seems pretty straightforward. And for a lot of the history of air travel, the industry was a lot more like that. And nowadays, what we see is a world where not only is that main incentive taking a back seat, but a lot of the other incentives that I would say the average traveler might have are now being completely ignored in favor of a whole bunch of government incentives. And so the airline industry is kind of unique in that a very large percentage of the total spending power that is spent on airline tickets in one way or another goes towards those government incentives, because you not only have the fact that when you've got your money that you've owned or you've earned, you have the fact that and then the government takes a large portion of that money that you earn through money printing and inflation. You also have the fact that there are a number of government tariffs, taxes, user fees, et cetera, at basically every airport in the world. And so ultimately, all of that money that the government confiscates one way or another goes to create this sort of phony security mechanism set up to really mainly to drive fear, right? Does anybody really believe that if your toothpaste was too big, that would be a danger to the plane? Like, I think some common sense could be applied to this. And if the goal was really to make the plane as safe as possible, I think a small, dedicated security crew who were trained to look for terrorists would be a lot more effective than a bunch of DEI hired minimum wage employees who want you to take off your shoes and audit everything in your bag to make sure it doesn't cross the line on any of all of these really rather arbitrary rules that have been set up to give us the sense that the government is doing something to keep us safe from this immeasurable danger in the form of terrorism on flights. And I think that danger, first of all, has been widely blown out of proportion, right? That planes are not the only thing that terrorists could blow up. You don't need to go through a metal detector to get on a bus, right? And you don't see terrorists blowing up buses all over the world. So it's really a fringe risk, the risk that your flight might be blown up. And even with the instances of terrorism that we've seen around the world, air travel is by far the safest way to travel when you look at it in terms of the number of deaths per kilometer, right? We're all pretty comfortable with the risks that we take when we get into a car. Every time you get into a car, there's certainly some risk that you die in a tragic accident. But because those risks are pretty low, we take that as part of the experience. And I think that's a much more reasonable way to look at air travel. And so, first of all, I think if we were on a Bitcoin standard, if we were in a world where the government didn't have the kind of control they have and they couldn't just print money to spend it on their own incentives, we wouldn't have this massive mechanism that causes you to get to the airport, 2-3 hours before your flight. Really results in a lot of unpleasantness and a lot of missed flights, and really makes the whole experience of going somewhere on a plane much more expensive and really a lot worse, right? And then the flip side of that, where I think we'll eventually see the airline industry start to get good, is when you apply capitalism to the whole system, right? When the government no longer has such a large, such a such control over such a large percentage of the resources, we as individuals will be empowered to spend our money on products and services that we like. And so, personally, I would like to see an airline that had pilots and mechanics who were hired regardless of race or gender or any other unalterable personal factors, who are hired solely based on their skills. I just want the best pilots and mechanics. I don't care about their other details. It'd be great if we had friendly, attractive flight attendants. I think most people can agree with that. Decent food, and just cut out that massive security line instead of having all of these minimum wage employees, like I say, auditing your toothpaste. Just a small number of highly trained individuals who are actually trained to look for terrorists, because the fact is that most of the time terrorists, regardless of whether they're Islamic extremists or white supremacist loners, they usually look like terrorists. You can probably pick them out in the crowd if you're trained to do so. And I think that would be a much less invasive level of security that could still provide some meaningful benefit. So that overall, I think, is how Bitcoin fixes the airline industry and realigns all of those perverse incentives that are currently there. So with that, we're getting to just about 7 minutes into this, and unfortunately, the time thieves in your federal government have stolen the remaining 53 minutes of this episode, and that's all we have for today. See you soon.